Yeah.
Well, look, it's a deeply worrying situation. I think it's really important to set out for your viewers what the task is. The task is to halve global emissions this decade in order to keep 1.5 degrees alive. That's what the scientists tell us will give us a fighting chance of keeping 1.5 degrees alive. Now, at the moment, the UN says we're not going to halve global emissions this decade. We're going to just cut them by 7%. That's the gap. That's the huge gap we have, and that produces the 2.7 degrees of warming. We've got to push really hard at this summit. This has got to be a real negotiation, not people coming along with their pre-prepared announcements, but saying, this is where we are, this is where the science is, as Tina Stegi was saying. It is existential for countries around the world. We've got to push much, much harder at this summit.
So if it's existential, do you think that climate change should be at the heart of every Labour Party policy now?
It should be, but let me just say about the negotiations, because I want to just say what needs to happen at these negotiations. First of all, we've got to put pressure on every big emitter. Boris Johnson was congratulating Australia this week on its heroic, as he put it, 2050 commitment. Now, commitments for 3 decades hence are fine, but we need commitments this decade. And Australia's commitment would take us to a 4-degree world. So first of all, the government has got to put proper pressure on the big emitters. No free passes at this summit, whether it's China or Australia or anyone else. Secondly, I want to go back to something you talked about with Alok in the interview around this $100 billion. Because I was part of that promise at Copenhagen, along with Gordon Brown.
And the countries are simply not getting the money.
I mean, it is shameful that this $100 billion has not yet been delivered. Now, this matters morally, but it also matters for this summit for the following reason, Andrew, which is we can only put pressure on the biggest emitters if we have an alliance of developing and vulnerable countries, like the Marshall Islands, and developed countries that want action. That's the pincer movement we need.
Sure.
And that's why and us cutting overseas aid, frankly, is reprehensible because it's taken us away from that. So we've got to. The part of this summit is about delivering on that $100 billion, on vaccinating the world, because it's shameful that the developing world only 1% of people are vaccinated. And then to put pressure on the biggest emitters.
Let's talk about Labour Party policy. You've been very critical of the government for halving air passenger duty, as they did in the budget. Would you reinstate that tax?
We'll set that out in the manifesto.
It's completely. I'm looking for leadership. You say you have to be specific.
Yeah, well,
You're going to lead. So give me some leadership.
Look, there's no question about our position on this. We're completely against this, and let me say why. Because we had a budget which was supposed to be days before COP26, where the Chancellor had a chance to set out investment plans to retrofit and insulate every home.
It's a very simple question. Would you repeal it or not?
Well, we're against it, and we'll set out our promise at the manifesto. You get a clear sense of where I'm going.
OK, all right. All right, I can see where you're going, but you haven't really told me yet. Let me ask you about flying more generally. I imagine that you, like me, like most people, came here by train. The UK is not a very, very big country. Do you think we have to get rid of internal domestic flights more or less completely?
I mean, not completely, but as much as we possibly can, which is why the domestic air passenger duty decision was the wrong decision. But here's the thing, Andrew, and this is my approach on the climate crisis and how we tackle it. We've got to give people...
What about flying from Manchester to London, Birmingham to London?
Let me just finish the point, if I can. We've got to give people alternatives. You see, the really regrettable thing about Rishi Sunak's budget, he could have been investing in public transport. He could have been investing in train services, in bus services. And that's the key. And, fairness and giving people alternatives is an absolutely key part of making this transition happen. And this government not making the investments we need means that we don't give people those alternatives.
OK, but there are alternatives.